The fog hung low over Willow Creek like a shroud, clinging to the pines that lined the narrow road and swallowing the world in a gray, mournful haze. It was just after dawn on a frigid March morning when the stillness shattered. A pickup truck, its rusted blue frame a familiar sight to the townsfolk, careened off the asphalt and plunged into a ditch. The crash was a violent symphony of twisting metal and splintering glass, echoing through the trees until it faded into an eerie silence. By the time the first rays of light pierced the mist, the driver, Tom Grayson, a local mechanic with calloused hands and a quiet smile, was gone. No body, no blood, just an empty cab and a mystery that settled over the small town like the fog itself. Emergency crews arrived within the hour, their flashing lights cutting through the gloom. They combed the wreckage, boots crunching on shattered glass, voices hushed as if afraid to disturb the stillness. Tom was nowhere to be found. The sheriff scribbled notes, the paramedics packed up unused stretchers, and the townspeople who'd gathered at the roadside whispered theories. Maybe he'd wandered off, dazed from the impact, or perhaps he'd never been in the truck at all. But as the hours ticked by and the search yielded nothing, the case began to feel like a ghost story, destined to fade into Willow Creek's quiet lore. That is until one small, unshakable detail refused to let it go. Max, Tom's golden retriever, stood sentinel by the crumpled wreckage. His scruffy fur was matted with dew, his soulful brown eyes fixed on the truck as if it held the answers no one else could see. Max wasn't a young dog. His muzzle bore streaks of gray and his gait carried the slight limp of old injuries, but there he was, unwavering, a solitary figure against the vast, misty backdrop. The townsfolk noticed him first, their murmurs softening as they watched him sit, then pace, then sit again. "Poor thing's grieving," said Mrs. Hargrove, the baker, setting down a bowl of water he didn't drink. Tom was all he had. But Max didn't behave like a dog in mourning. He didn't howl or whimper into the void. Instead, he barked, a sharp, insistent sound that cut through the fog like a plea. He'd nose the driver's door, paw at the dented metal, then step back and bark again, his gaze never wavering. The wind howled through the pines, rustling the needles as if nature itself were whispering back, but Max paid it no mind. Rain began to fall, a soft patter that turned to a steady drum against the truck's roof, soaking his fur until it clung to his frame. Still, he stayed. Day 1 became day 2, then day 3, and with each passing hour his barking grew louder, more desperate, as if he were shouting into a world too deaf to hear. By the 4th morning, the townsfolk couldn't ignore it any longer. A small crowd gathered at the ditch, their coats pulled tight against the chill, their faces etched with unease. "He's been there since the crash," said old Mr. Carter, leaning on his cane. "Won't eat, won't sleep. Just keeps barking at that damn truck." The whispers grew. Some said it was loyalty, others superstition. Children peered from behind their parents, wide-eyed, recalling tales of dogs that sensed things humans couldn't. "Maybe he sees Tom's ghost," one boy muttered, earning a sharp hush from his mother. But the adults felt it too, a creeping chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Firefighter Jake Miller arrived just as the rain tapered off, his heavy boots sinking into the muddy earth. A burly man with a beard streaked with gray, Jake had seen his share of tragedies in Willow Creek. House fires, lost hikers, the occasional bar fight gone wrong. But something about Max stopped him cold. He watched the dog pace, bark, then sit, his eyes locked on the truck with an intensity that prickled the hairs on Jake's neck. "That's not grief," he muttered to his crew, his voice low but firm. "That's something else." He'd always had a soft spot for dogs. His own mutt, Rusty, waited for him at home every shift. But this was different. Max wasn't mourning. He was insisting. Jake knelt beside the retriever, the damp grass soaking through his pants. "Hey, boy," he said softly, reaching out a gloved hand. Max's ears twitched, but he didn't pull away. His fur was cold and wet under Jake's fingers, yet his body thrummed with a quiet energy, like a coiled spring. "What is it, huh? What's wrong?" Max turned his head, meeting Jake's gaze with those deep, knowing eyes, then let out a single, sharp bark. His nose nudged the truck's trunk, a deliberate motion that sent a jolt through Jake's chest. The firefighter glanced back at his team, their silhouettes blurred in the fog. "He's trying to tell us something," he said, standing slowly. something we missed. The crowd grew quiet, the air thick with anticipation. The truck sat there, a twisted relic in the ditch, its secrets locked behind battered steel. Jake's hand tightened around the radio at his hip, his mind racing. They'd searched it already, hadn't they? But Max's relentless vigil gnawed at him, a question that refused to be silenced. What was he seeing that they couldn't? The wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of pine and gasoline, and in that moment, Jake knew. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The fog thickened around the ditch as Jake Miller stood, his breath clouding in the damp air. The crowd's murmurs faded into a low hum, their eyes darting between the firefighter and the golden retriever at his side. Max sat rigid, his wet fur glistening under the pale morning light, his gaze locked on the truck's trunk with an intensity that felt almost human. Jake's words hung in the air. He's trying to tell us something. And the weight of them settled over Willow Creek like a storm about to break. The truck, once just a mangled heap of metal, now loomed larger, its dents and scratches whispering secrets no one had thought to hear. Jake turned to his crew, their faces half hidden in the mist. "We searched it, right?" he asked, his voice steady but edged with doubt. Tim, a wiry young firefighter with a nervous habit of chewing his lip, nodded. "Top to bottom, Jake. Cab was empty, trunk too. Just the usual. Tire, some tools. No sign of Tom." But even as Tim spoke, his eyes flicked to Max, who let out a low, insistent whimper, his paw tapping the ground as if urging them to reconsider. Jake's jaw tightened. He'd seen dogs mourn before, heads bowed, tails still. But this wasn't that. This was purpose. "Check it again," Jake said, grabbing a crowbar from the fire truck's kit. His tone brooked no argument, and the crew exchanged uneasy glances before stepping forward. The townsfolk pressed closer, their coats rustling, their breaths held. Mrs. Hargrove clutched her scarf, her voice trembling. "What if it's nothing, Jake? What if he's just lost it?" Jake didn't answer. He couldn't. Not when Max's eyes burned into him, pleading in a language older than words. The trunk was a mess of twisted steel, its latch warped from the crash. Jake wedged the crowbar under the edge, muscles straining as he pried. Metal groaned, a sound that echoed through the pines like a wounded animal until, with a sudden pop, the lid sprang free. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, but at first there was nothing to see. Just a spare tire caked in mud and a threadbare blanket tossed carelessly atop it. Tim shrugged, his relief palpable. "See? Told you. Empty." But Max didn't relent. He surged forward, nearly knocking Jake off balance, and nosed the blanket aside with a frantic urgency. His whimpers turned to sharp barks, each one a dagger in the silence. Jake's heart thudded against his ribs as he knelt again, peering into the trunk's shadowed depths. That's when he saw it. A faint seam, a hairline fracture in the floor, barely visible beneath the grime. It wasn't natural, it was deliberate. A hidden panel. "Hold on," Jake muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. He ran his fingers along the seam, feeling the cold metal give slightly under his touch. The crowd leaned in, their shadows stretching across the ditch like specters. Max sat back, his tail thumping once, twice, as if he knew the moment was near. Jake's crowbar found purchase, and with a grunt, he pried the panel loose. It lifted with a creak, revealing a shallow compartment no bigger than a toolbox. Inside, glinting faintly in the dim light, was a cell phone. Its screen cracked but alive with a soft glow, and a crumpled piece of paper bound with duct tape. The air seemed to still, the fog itself holding its breath. Jake's hands trembled as he reached for the paper, peeling back the tape with deliberate care. The handwriting was shaky, scrawled in haste, but unmistakable. "They took me." Max knows. Help below it, a timestamp. 3:47 a.m., just hours after the crash. Jake's throat tightened, his mind racing to catch up. Tom wasn't dead. He hadn't wandered off. He'd been taken. By who and why, the note didn't say. But Max had known. Max had always known. "Jake?" Tim's voice broke through, tentative, almost afraid. "What's it say?" Jake didn't answer right away. He turned the paper over, then back, as if it might reveal more. The cell phone's glow pulsed faintly, a silent witness to whatever had happened here. Max let out a low howl, a sound that shivered down every spine in the crowd, and Jake finally looked up, his face pale but resolute. Call the police, Ernie said, his voice cutting through the mist like a blade. Now. The firefighters froze, their wide-eyed stares mirroring the townsfolk's growing unease. Mrs. Hargrove's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob, while Mr. Carter's cane slipped in the mud, sending him staggering. Police? He rasped. What in God's name is going on? Jake didn't have time to explain. Not yet. He stood, clutching the note, and met Max's gaze. The dog's tail wagged once, a flicker of relief, as if he'd been waiting for this exact moment. The crowd erupted into whispers, questions tumbling over one another, but Jake barely heard them. His eyes drifted back to the truck, its secrets spilling out like blood from a wound. The fog swirled thicker now, cloaking the pines in an impenetrable veil, but it couldn't hide the truth any longer. What they'd thought was a tragedy, a lone man lost to the night, was something far darker. Max had been shouting it into the void for days, and finally someone had listened. Jake's radio crackled to life as Tim relayed the call, his voice shaking. Sheriff Bennett, you need to get down here. It's Tom Grayson, and it's bad. The wind picked up, carrying the faint wail of sirens in the distance, and Jake knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. The sirens wailed closer, their mournful cries slicing through the fog like a blade through silk. Jake Miller stood beside the wrecked truck, the crumpled note still clutched in his gloved hand, its words searing into his mind. They took me. Max knows. Help. The paper trembled slightly, not from the wind, but from the weight of what it meant. Tom Grayson, the quiet mechanic who'd fixed half the town's cars with a grin and a nod, wasn't lost to some tragic accident. He'd been ripped away, stolen into the night, and Max, his scruffy golden retriever, had been screaming the truth into a world too slow to hear. Now, as the red and blue lights flickered through the mist, that world was waking up. Max sat tall beside the open trunk, his wet fur catching the glow of the approaching squad cars. His ears twitched with every sound, the rustle of the crowd, the crackle of Jake's radio, the distant hum of engines, but his eyes never left the truck. It was as if he could see through the metal, past the hidden compartment, to wherever Tom was now. Jake knelt beside him, resting a hand on the dog's damp head. You're a hell of a partner, Max, he murmured, his voice thick with something between awe and dread. Max's tail thumped once, a quiet acknowledgement, but his focus didn't waver. The crowd parted as Sheriff Laura Bennett's patrol car rolled to a stop, gravel crunching under its tires. She stepped out, a wiry woman in her 40s with sharp green eyes and a no-nonsense stride that silenced the whispers. Her badge glinted faintly in the fog, a beacon of authority in the chaos. She'd been sheriff for a decade, steering Willow Creek through its small dramas with a steady hand, but the tightness in her jaw said this was different. She'd heard Tim's call, short, frantic, urgent, and now her gaze swept the scene. The truck, the firefighters, the townsfolk, and Max, sitting like a sentinel amid it all. Jake, she said, her voice crisp but edged with concern, what have we got? He stood, handing her the note without a word. Her eyes scanned it, narrowing as the timestamp sank in. 3:47 a.m., just hours after the crash. Who's they? She muttered, almost to herself, then glanced at the truck. The cell phone lay in the compartment, its cracked screen pulsing faintly, a lifeline to whatever had happened here. She picked it up, her fingers brushing the duct tape residue, and tapped the screen. A voice memo blinked up, unplayed. She hesitated, then pressed it. Tom's voice crackled through, faint and ragged, like a man fighting to hold on. Max, find help. They're taking me to the old mill. Don't let them... The recording cut off mid-breath, swallowed by static. A chill ran through the crowd, a collective shiver that rippled from Laura to the townsfolk. Mrs. Hargrove clutched her scarf tighter, her eyes welling up. Oh, Lord, she whispered. He's alive? Jake nodded, his throat tight. Was, at least then. Laura's face hardened, her mind already spinning. The old mill, an abandoned lumber site on the town's edge, its skeletal frame a relic of better days. It was a mile out, tucked among the pines, a place kids dared each other to explore and adults avoided after dark. She turned to Max, who met her gaze with those deep, knowing eyes. "You're a smart one, aren't you?" she said softly, almost reverently. Max barked once, sharp and clear, as if answering her. She straightened, tucking the phone into an evidence bag. "We're moving, now!" The firefighters snapped to action, grabbing gear as Laura barked orders into her radio. "Unit 2, meet us at the mill. Bring backup. Possible abduction in progress." The crowd buzzed, questions tumbling over one another. Who took him? Why Tom? What's at the mill? But Laura ignored them, her focus laser sharp. Jake stepped forward, crowbar still in hand. "I'm coming with you," he said, his tone leaving no room for debate. She eyed him, then nodded. "Fine, but stay out of my way." Max didn't wait for permission. He bolted toward Laura's car, pausing only to glance back at Jake, his tail wagging with a fierce determination that sent a shiver down the firefighter's spine. "He's leading us," Jake said, climbing into the passenger seat as Laura slid behind the wheel. She didn't argue, there was no time. The engine roared to life and the car peeled out, Max trotting ahead like a beacon through the fog. Behind them, the townsfolk gathered, their silhouettes fading into the mist, their whispers swallowed by the wail of more sirens converging on the scene. The road to the mill wound through the pines, the fog pressing in until the world shrank to a tunnel of gray. Laura's hands gripped the wheel, her knuckles white, while Jake stared ahead, the note's words looping in his mind. "They took me. Max knows." "What do you think we're walking into?" he asked, his voice low. Laura didn't look at him. "Trouble," she said simply. "Tom's not the type to owe debts or pick fights. If someone took him, it's personal, or bigger than we know." Max's silhouette darted through the haze, his barks echoing back like a call to arms. The mill loomed ahead, its rusted walls clawing at the sky, a hulking shadow in the fog. Laura slowed the car, her eyes scanning the perimeter. "There," she said, nodding toward a side entrance where Max had stopped, his growls rumbling through the stillness. The air grew heavier, thick with dust and the faint tang of decay, and Jake felt it. A prickling sense that they were stepping into something dark, something alive with secrets. The squad cars pulled up behind them, lights flashing but sirens off, preserving the fragile quiet. Laura stepped out, her hand resting on her holster, and Jake followed, his heart pounding. Max stood at the entrance, his ears flat, his growl deepening into a warning. Whatever lay inside, Max knew it was close, and he wasn't backing down. The old mill rose from the fog like a forgotten titan, its rusted walls streaked with decades of rain and neglect. The air was heavy with the scent of damp wood and rot, a stale breath that clung to the pines and seeped into every crevice. Sheriff Laura Bennett stood at the threshold of the side entrance, her hand hovering over her holster, her sharp green eyes cutting through the haze. Beside her, Jake Miller gripped his crowbar, its weight a cold comfort against the unknown. Max, the golden retriever, stood between them, his growl a low, steady rumble that vibrated through the earth, a warning etched in instinct. The mill was silent, yet it roared with secrets, and they all felt it. Laura motioned to her deputies, two young officers, their faces taut with nerves, as they fanned out behind her, flashlights slicing through the gloom. "Stay tight," she whispered, her voice a thread of steel. "We don't know what's in there." Max's ears flattened, his body tensing as if he could hear something beyond the reach of human senses. He took a step forward, claws clicking on the cracked concrete, and barked, a sharp, commanding sound that echoed off the metal walls. Laura nodded at Jake. "He's leading. We follow." The entrance gaped like a wound, its hinges long rusted away, leaving a jagged frame that swallowed the light. Inside, the air thickened, dust swirling in lazy eddies as their boots stirred the stillness. The mill's interior was a labyrinth of shadows, towering stacks of rotting lumber, machinery frozen in time, and cobwebs that draped the rafters like funeral veils. Every step reverberated, a hollow thud against the wooden floor, and the faint creak of the building seemed to whisper back, alive with memory. Jake's flashlight beam danced across the walls, catching glints of rusted nails and the ghostly outlines of faded signs. "Tom?" he called, his voice swallowed by the vastness. No answer came. Max darted ahead, his barks growing sharper, more urgent as he wove through the debris. Laura and Jake hurried to keep pace, their breaths clouding in the chill. The deputies trailed behind, their flashlight beams trembling slightly, betraying their unease. This place gives me the creeps, one muttered. Deputy Harris, a rookie with a boyish face. Laura shot him a look. Focus, she snapped, but her own pulse quickened as Max stopped at a hallway branching off the main floor. The dog's growl deepened, his hackles rising, and he scratched at a heavy wooden door, its paint peeling like skin. Jake approached, his crowbar raised instinctively. Max knows something's here, he said, his voice low but firm. Laura nodded, drawing her pistol with a smooth, practiced motion. On three, she said, meeting Jake's gaze. 1, 2. On three, Jake slammed the crowbar into the door's edge, splintering the wood with a crack that shattered the silence. The door gave way, swinging inward to reveal a narrow room cloaked in shadow. Dust billowed out, stinging their eyes, but Max didn't hesitate. He lunged inside, his barks echoing off the walls. The beam of Laura's flashlight swept the space, landing on a figure slumped in a chair at the far end. Tom Grayson, bruised, gagged, his wrists bound with rope, blinked against the sudden light, his face pale but alive. Tom! Jake shouted, rushing forward, but before he could reach him, a shadow moved. Two men in dark jackets burst from the corners, their faces hard and eyes wild with panic. One wielded a tire iron, swinging it at Jake with a guttural yell. Jake ducked, the metal whistling past his head, and stumbled back, his crowbar clattering to the floor. Max reacted in an instant. With a fierce snarl, he leapt at the man with the tire iron, sinking his teeth into his leg. The man howled, staggering as blood bloomed through his jeans, and swung wildly, trying to shake the dog off. The second man lunged at Laura, a knife glinting in his hand, but she was faster. Her pistol cracked once, a deafening shot that sent him sprawling with a cry, clutching his shoulder. Drop it, she barked at the first man, her gun trained on him as Max held firm. The tire iron fell with a clang, and the man raised his hands, his face twisting in pain and defeat. Jake scrambled to Tom, yanking the gag free. You okay? He rasped, his hands fumbling with the ropes. Tom coughed, his voice hoarse. Max, you did it, boy. His eyes locked with the dog's, tears welling up as Max released the man's leg and bounded to his side, licking his face with a soft whine. Laura's deputies rushed in, cuffing the attackers as their groans filled the air. Loan sharks, Tom muttered, his breath ragged. I owed them. They staged the crash. Laura holstered her weapon, her face a mask of controlled fury. You're safe now, she said, but her eyes scanned the room, lingering on the blood-streaked floor and the flickering bulb overhead. The mill's shadows seemed to pulse, as if reluctant to let go of its secrets. Jake helped Tom to his feet, his arm steadying the mechanic's trembling frame, while Max pressed close, his tail wagging faintly, a flicker of hope in the darkness. Outside, the fog clung to the pines, muffling the sound of more sirens converging on the mill. The deputies dragged the men out, their curses fading into the mist, but Laura lingered, her gaze drifting to Max. He led us right to you, she said, a rare softness in her voice. Tom nodded, his hand resting on Max's head. He's all I've got. The mill stood silent now, its roar stilled, but the air thrummed with something unspoken, a truth still unraveling in the haze. The fog outside the old mill seemed to thicken as the deputies hauled the two loan sharks into the waiting squad cars, their curses swallowed by the mist. The red and blue lights pulsed faintly, casting eerie shadows across the rusted walls. But inside the narrow room where Tom Grayson had been held, a fragile stillness settled. Sheriff Laura Bennett stood near the doorway, her sharp green eyes scanning the blood-streaked floor and the chair where Tom had been bound. The air was thick with dust and the metallic tang of violence, a lingering echo of the chaos that had just unfolded. Jake Miller knelt beside Tom, steadying him as the mechanic leaned against the wall, his bruised face illuminated by the flickering bulb overhead. And Max, loyal, scruffy Max, pressed close to Tom's side, his golden fur matted with sweat and grime, his tail wagging faintly as if to say, You're here. I found you. Tom's hands trembled as he ran them through Max's fur, his breath shallow but steadying. You did it, boy, he rasped again, his voice cracking with relief and exhaustion. His eyes, red-rimmed and sunken from days of captivity, met the dogs, and for a moment the world shrank to just the two of them. Max licked Tom's hand, a soft whine escaping his throat, and Jake felt a lump rise in his own. He'd seen rescues before, pulled people from burning homes and icy rivers, but this unshakable bond hit him differently. "He never gave up on you," Jake said, his voice low, almost reverent. Tom nodded, a tear slipping down his cheek. "He's all I've got." Laura stepped closer, her boots scuffing the dusty floor. She'd holstered her pistol, but her posture remained taut, her mind still racing. "Loan sharks," she said, repeating Tom's words as if testing their weight. "You owed them money?" Tom's gaze dropped, shame flickering across his face. "A few grand," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Business went bad last year. Lost a big contract. Couldn't pay the bills. They came knocking, said they'd take everything if I didn't settle up. I thought I could handle it. Until the crash." Jake frowned, glancing at the rope still coiled on the floor. They staged it," he said, piecing it together. "Made it look like you were gone, dead or missing, so no one would come looking." Laura nodded, her jaw tightening. "Smart play. Almost worked, too. If it weren't for Max." Her eyes drifted to the dog, who sat tall beside Tom, his ears perked as if listening to every word. She crouched, resting a hand on his head. "You're a damn hero, you know that?" Max's tail thumped once, a quiet acknowledgement, and a rare smile tugged at Laura's lips. Outside, the deputies' radios crackled, voices overlapping as they coordinated with the arriving backup. The mill's skeletal frame groaned in the wind, its rusted beams swaying faintly, and the fog pressed against the broken windows like a living thing. Jake helped Tom to his feet, his arm firm under the mechanic's shaky frame. "Let's get you out of here," he said, guiding him toward the door. Tom leaned heavily on him, his legs unsteady, but Max stayed glued to his side, a golden shadow refusing to let him go. As they stepped into the open air, the crowd from Willow Creek, drawn by the sirens and rumors, gathered at the mill's edge, their faces a mix of shock and relief. Mrs. Hargrove pushed through, her scarf fluttering as she clutched a thermos of coffee. "Tom Grayson, you're alive," she cried, her voice breaking. "We thought, oh Lord, we thought you were gone." Mr. Carter hobbled closer, his cane sinking into the mud. "That dog of yours, he's something else. Smarter than half this town." The murmurs swelled, a tide of awe and gratitude, and Tom managed a weak smile, his hand resting on Max's head. Laura lingered at the entrance, her flashlight beam cutting through the fog as she surveyed the mill one last time. Something gnawed at her, a prickling sense that this wasn't the whole story. Loan sharks didn't go to these lengths for a few grand, not with a staged crash and a hideout this elaborate. She turned to Deputy Harris, who stood nearby, his rookie nerves still evident. "Get forensics out here," she said, her tone clipped. "I want every inch of this place searched. Prints, DNA, anything they left behind." Harris nodded, scrambling to his radio, but Laura's gaze drifted back to Tom and Max, now surrounded by the townsfolk. Jake caught her eye, his brow furrowing. "You think there's more to it?" he asked, keeping his voice low. Laura didn't answer right away. She watched Max nuzzle Tom's leg, the dog's loyalty a beacon in the chaos, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "Maybe," she said finally. "Tom's a good man. Quiet, keeps to himself. Doesn't strike me as the type to tangle with sharks this ruthless. If they wanted him dead, why keep him alive here?" The question hung between them, heavy and unanswered. The mill loomed behind, its shadows stretching long and dark, as if reluctant to release its grip. The crowd's voices faded into a distant hum, and Max let out a soft bark, his head tilting toward the mill as if he too sensed something lingering. Laura's hand brushed her holster again, an instinct she couldn't shake. "We've got him back," she said, more to herself than Jake. "But this isn't over." Tom leaned against Jake, his strength fading as the adrenaline ebbed. "Take me home," he murmured, his voice barely audible. Jake nodded, guiding him toward the ambulance pulling up through the fog, but his eyes lingered on Laura. The sheriff stood alone now, her silhouette framed against the mill's jagged outline, a sentinel in the haze. Max trotted beside Tom, his tail wagging faintly, but his ears stayed alert, attuned to a danger none of them could yet name. The fog clung to Willow Creek like a jealous lover, reluctant to release its hold as the ambulance doors swung open. Tom Grayson slumped onto the stretcher, his bruised face pale under the paramedics' harsh lights, his breath shallow but steady. Max, the golden retriever, leapt in beside him, his damp fur brushing Tom's arm as he settled close, a guardian refusing to be parted. Jake Miller stood at the edge, his crowbar dangling at his side, watching as the medics strapped Tom in. The crowd's murmur swelled, a tide of relief and wonder. But Jake's gaze drifted back to Sheriff Laura Bennett, still framed against the mill's rusted silhouette. Her sharp green eyes hadn't softened. They burned with a quiet intensity, scanning the shadows as if they might speak. "Keep him stable," Laura called to the paramedics, her voice cutting through the haze. "I'll need to talk to him once he's patched up." The medic nodded, slamming the door shut, and the ambulance rolled off, its siren a fading wail swallowed by the pines. Max's face pressed against the rear window, his soulful eyes locked on Jake until the fog claimed them both. The firefighter exhaled, a cloud of breath mingling with the mist, but the weight in his chest didn't lift. Laura's words echoed in his mind. This isn't over, and the mill's looming presence seemed to nod in agreement. Laura turned to Deputy Harris, who fidgeted nearby, his rookie nerves fraying under her stare. "Forensics is 10 minutes out," he reported, his voice unsteady. "They'll sweep the place, top to bottom." She nodded, but her attention shifted to the mill's side entrance, where Max had led them. The door hung crooked on its splintered frame, a dark maw exhaling dust and secrets. She stepped closer, her boots crunching on gravel, and peered inside. The flickering bulb still swayed faintly, casting jagged shadows across the blood-streaked floor. "Too clean," she muttered, almost to herself. They had him tied up, but no mess, no struggle. Why? Jake joined her, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. "You think they were waiting for something?" he asked, his voice low. Laura's jaw tightened. "Or someone. Loan sharks don't play this long a game for a few grand. They'd have roughed him up, taken what they could, and dumped him. This feels planned." She crouched, running a finger along a scuff mark near the chair. Too deliberate, too precise. They wanted him alive for a reason. The mill groaned, its rusted beams creaking in the wind, and a chill prickled Jake's neck. He swept his light across the room, catching glints of metal and the faint outline of a trapdoor in the corner, half hidden under a pile of rotting planks. "Over here," he said, his pulse quickening. Laura crossed the space in 3 strides, shoving the planks aside with a grunt. The trapdoor was old, its wood warped and splintered, but a shiny new padlock gleamed against the decay, a stark contrast that set Jake's teeth on edge. "New lock on an old door," Laura said, her voice sharp with suspicion. She drew her pistol, motioning Jake back. "Stand clear." With a single precise shot, the lock shattered, the sound ricocheting off the walls like thunder. The trapdoor creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness, a void that swallowed the light and exhaled a damp, earthy scent. Jake's flashlight trembled slightly as he aimed it down, the beam catching only shadows and the glint of something metallic far below. "We need to check it," he said. But Laura grabbed his arm, her grip firm. "Not yet. Forensics first. If there's evidence down there, we don't contaminate it." Her eyes narrowed, scanning the stairs. "But Max knew this place. Led us straight to Tom. What else does he know?" The question hung heavy, unanswered, as the wind whistled through the mill, carrying a faint sound, a rustle, a scrape, from the depths below. Jake's stomach twisted. "You hear that?" he whispered. Laura nodded, her hand tightening on her weapon. "Something's down there," she said, her voice low but steady. "Or someone." She stepped back, radioing Harris. "Tell forensics to bring lights and gear for a basement. We've got a secondary scene." Harris's voice crackled back, shaky but compliant, and Laura holstered her pistol, her gaze fixed on the trapdoor. This isn't just about Tom anymore. Outside, the crowd had thinned, the townsfolk drifting back to their homes, but a few lingered. Mrs. Hargrove, Mr. Carter, a handful of curious kids, watching from the fog's edge. The mill's silhouette loomed larger now, its rusted walls clawing at the sky, and Jake felt it, a weight of unseen eyes watching from the shadows. He glanced at Laura, her face a mask of resolve, and knew she felt it too. What if they're still here? He asked, his voice barely audible over the wind. Then we find them, she said, her tone cold as steel. She turned to the entrance, her flashlight sweeping the perimeter, but the fog pressed in, cloaking the pines in an impenetrable veil. The mill stood silent, its secrets buried deep, but the rustle from below lingered in Jake's mind, a whisper of something alive, something waiting. Max was gone now, safe with Tom, but his absence left a void, a question that gnawed at them both. What had he sensed that they couldn't? The distant hum of forensics vans rumbled through the haze, a promise of answers, but the mill's dark heart pulsed on, unrelenting. Laura's hand brushed her holster again, an instinct she couldn't shake, and Jake tightened his grip on the crowbar. The fog swirled, the pines whispered, and the trapdoor gaped like an open wound, inviting them deeper into a truth they weren't yet ready to face. The fog pressed against the old mill like a living shroud, its tendrils seeping through the broken windows and curling around the rusted beams. Sheriff Laura Bennett stood at the edge of the trapdoor, her flashlight beam slicing into the darkness below. But the light faltered, swallowed by a void that seemed to breathe. Jake Miller flanked her, his crowbar a cold weight in his hands, his breath clouding in the damp air. The faint rustle from the basement lingered in their ears, a whisper of movement, a scrape of something alive, and it clawed at their nerves, urging them deeper into the mill's shadowed heart. The distant rumble of the forensics vans grew louder, but time felt suspended, trapped in the haze that cloaked Willow Creek. Laura's radio crackled, Deputy Harris's voice cutting through. Forensics is 5 minutes out, Sheriff. They've got lights gear, everything you asked for. She nodded, though he couldn't see it, her eyes fixed on the stairs descending into the unknown. Good, she said, her tone clipped. Tell them to hustle. She clicked the radio off, her hand brushing her holster as she turned to Jake. We wait. No sense stumbling blind into whatever's down there. But her voice betrayed a flicker of unease, a crack in her steely resolve. Jake's jaw tightened, his flashlight trembling slightly as he aimed it into the trapdoor. Max led us to Tom, he said, his words heavy with conviction. He knew exactly where to go, every step. If there's more to this, he'd have known that too. Laura's gaze flicked to him, sharp and assessing. Maybe, she conceded, but Max isn't here now. We are. And I'm not risking evidence or lives on a hunch. Her eyes drifted back to the stairs, the glint of metal at the bottom catching her light for a fleeting second before vanishing into shadow. The mill groaned, its rusted frame swaying faintly in the wind, and the air grew colder, heavier, as if the building itself resented their presence. Jake stepped closer to the trapdoor, peering down, his pulse thudding in his ears. You saw that lock, he said, his voice low. Brand new on a door that's falling apart. Someone's been here, recently. Laura didn't respond right away, but her silence was answer enough. She crouched, her flashlight sweeping the stairs, and spotted a faint smear of dirt. Too fresh, too deliberate, on the splintered wood. You're not wrong, she said finally. But we need more than dirt to go on. The rustle came again, sharper this time. A scrape of metal on stone, unmistakable now. Jake's grip tightened on the crowbar, his body tensing. That's not the wind, he whispered. Laura's hand snapped to her pistol, her eyes narrowing as she aimed her light into the void. Stay back, she ordered, her voice a low growl, but before she could move, a shadow flickered at the edge of her beam, a fleeting shape, too quick to define. Sheriff, Jake hissed, lunging forward, but she held up a hand, freezing him in place. Hold, she said, her breath steady despite the adrenaline spiking through her veins. The shadow vanished, the sound fading into silence, but the air thrummed with a presence. Something watching, waiting. Laura's mind raced, piecing together fragments. Tom's abduction, the staged crash, the loan shark's calculated brutality. It didn't add up, not fully. This isn't just about money, she muttered, almost to herself. They were holding him for something bigger. Jake's flashlight caught a glint again, metal, sharp-edged, half buried in the dust at the stair's base. There, he said, pointing. Laura squinted, her beam locking onto it. A small key, its surface scratched but gleaming, resting on the stone floor like a taunt. A key, she said, her voice tightening. To what? She straightened, her mind spinning. If they left it behind, they didn't mean to, or they didn't have time to grab it. The forensics vans rolled up outside, their headlights piercing the fog, and the mill's shadows retreated slightly, as if reluctant to face the light. Laura stepped back from the trapdoor, her pistol still drawn. We've got a live scene, she said, her tone cold with determination. Whatever's down there, it's tied to Tom, and it's not over. Jake nodded, his eyes locked on the key, a question burning in his chest. What had Max sensed that led them here? The forensics team spilled into the mill, their gear clattering as they set up floodlights and cameras. A wiry tech named Clara, her glasses perched on her nose, approached Laura with a clipboard. Sheriff, where do we start? Laura pointed to the trapdoor. Down there. Secure that key first. Bag it, print it. Then sweep the whole basement. I want answers. Clara nodded, signaling her team, and the floodlights blazed to life, casting harsh beams into the darkness below. The stairs came into stark relief, steep, uneven, slick with damp, and at the bottom, a narrow corridor stretched into shadow, its walls lined with rusted pipes. The key glinted brighter now. A silent sentinel, but the rustle didn't return. Jake watched as Clara descended, her gloved hands retrieving the key with surgical precision, sealing it in an evidence bag. Got it, she called up, her voice echoing. Looks old, but the scratches are fresh. Laura's jaw clenched. Fresh? She repeated. Someone was here, right before us. The mill's air grew colder, the fog outside swirling thicker, and Jake felt it again. The weight of unseen eyes pressing down from the shadows. The floodlights buzzed, their glare illuminating the corridor, and Clara's voice rang out sharp with shock. Sheriff, you need to see this. Laura and Jake exchanged a glance, their pulses racing, and stepped toward the trapdoor. The mill held its breath, its secrets unraveling one dust-choked thread at a time. The floodlights buzzed like a swarm of restless insects, their harsh glare spilling down the trapdoor's stairs and into the mill's basement. Sheriff Laura Bennett stood at the edge, her pistol still in hand, her sharp green eyes locked on the narrow corridor below. Jake Miller flanked her, his crowbar a steady weight against his palm, his breath catching as Clara's voice echoed up. Sharp, urgent, laced with disbelief. Sheriff, you need to see this. The words hung in the air, heavy with promise and dread, and the mill's shadows seemed to tighten, as if reluctant to surrender their secrets. The fog outside pressed against the broken windows, a silent witness to the unraveling truth, and Laura felt it, a pulse of something alive, something waiting. Stay close, she said to Jake, her voice low but firm, and descended the stairs with a predator's grace. Jake followed, his boots thudding on the warped wood, his flashlight beam trembling as it swept the damp, rusted walls. The air grew colder with each step, thick with the scent of earth and decay, and the corridor stretched ahead, narrow, claustrophobic, its pipes dripping with condensation that gleamed like tears in the light. Clara stood at the far end, her gloved hands hovering over a metal door embedded in the stone, its surface scratched and dented but sealed tight with a heavy lock. The key they'd found rested in her evidence bag, its fresh scratches glinting accusingly. What is it? Laura demanded, her tone cutting through the stillness. Clara turned, her glasses fogging slightly in the damp, and pointed to the door. This, she said, her voice shaking. It's a vault. Old industrial, probably from when the mill ran. But look. She stepped aside, revealing a series of markings etched into the metal. Dates, initials, numbers, scrawled in a frantic hand. Among them, one stood out. TG 31525, Tom Grayson's initials dated just days ago. Jake's stomach lurched. That's the day before the crash, he said, his voice tight. He was here. Laura's eyes narrowed, her flashlight tracing the markings. He wasn't just held, she muttered. He was working on something. She snatched the evidence bag from Clara, her fingers deft as she freed the key. It fit the lock perfectly, turning with a groan that reverberated through the corridor like a dying breath. The door swung open, hinges screaming, and the floodlights poured in, illuminating a chamber that stole the air from their lungs. Inside was a cache, Crates stacked against the walls, their lids pried open to reveal bundles of cash, neatly banded and labeled with names: Willow Creek Church Fund, Hargrove Bakery, Carter Estate. Beside them, ledgers sprawled across a rusted table, their pages yellowed but filled with meticulous records: dates, amounts, transactions stretching back years. Jake's beam caught a photograph pinned to the wall. Tom, younger, standing beside a man in a dark suit, both smiling outside the mill. "What the hell?" he breathed, his mind racing to connect the dots. Laura stepped inside, her boots echoing on the stone floor, and flipped through a ledger. "Embezzlement," she said, her voice cold with realization. Millions siphoned from the town, church donations, small businesses, estates. Tom wasn't just a mechanic, he was their bookkeeper. She turned to the photo, her jaw clenching, and he wasn't alone. The man in the suit was unfamiliar, but the glint of a gold ring on his finger matched the loan shark's gaudy style, a thread tying them together. Clara's voice broke the silence, faint but urgent. "Sheriff, there's more." She pointed to a crate in the corner, its lid ajar, revealing not cash, but files, dozens of them stuffed with documents, photos, and maps. Laura pulled one free, her eyes widening as she scanned it. A blueprint of Willow Creek, marked with red X's, properties, businesses, homes, all tied to the ledger's names. "They weren't just stealing," she said, her voice trembling with fury. "They were planning to take the whole damn town." Jake's flashlight swept the room, landing on a scrawled note taped to a crate. "They know I'm onto them." Crash was a warning. "Max, find help." His heart sank, the pieces snapping into place. "Tom figured it out," he said, his voice raw. He was going to blow the whistle, so they staged the crash to shut him up. The loan sharks were just muscle. Someone else is pulling the strings. The mill shuddered, a gust of wind rattling the pipes, and a faint thud echoed from deeper in the corridor, beyond the vault where the shadows stretched unbroken. Laura's hand snapped to her pistol, her body tensing. "We're not alone," she whispered, her beam darting to the darkness. Jake gripped his crowbar, his pulse pounding, and Clara stumbled back, her clipboard clattering to the floor. "What was that?" she hissed, her glasses slipping down her nose. Laura signaled for silence, her flashlight cutting through the gloom, but the sound didn't repeat, just a heavy, oppressive quiet that pressed against their ears. "Someone's still here," she said, her voice low and lethal. "Watching us." She stepped toward the corridor, her pistol raised, but Jake grabbed her arm. "Wait, forensics is armed, let them sweep it." She glared at him, her resolve unwavering, but nodded reluctantly. "Fine. But we lock this down, now." The floodlights buzzed louder, their glare illuminating the vault's grim bounty, and the fog outside seemed to pulse, as if alive with the town's stolen dreams. Max's note burned in Jake's mind. Find help. And he realized the dog hadn't just saved Tom. He'd led them to a truth that could save Willow Creek itself. But the thud lingered, a promise of confrontation, and the mill's shadows whispered back, daring them to step deeper into the abyss. The mill's basement pulsed with a tension as thick as the fog outside, the floodlights casting stark shadows across the vault's grim treasures. Sheriff Laura Bennett stood at the threshold of the corridor beyond, her pistol drawn, her sharp green eyes piercing the darkness where the faint thud had echoed moments before. Jake Miller flanked her, his crowbar raised, his breath shallow as the weight of their discovery settled over him. Tom Grayson, not just a victim but a whistleblower, caught in a web of greed that threatened to devour Willow Creek. The crates of stolen cash, the ledgers, the blueprints, they painted a picture of betrayal so vast it chilled the air, and the unseen presence lurking in the shadows only deepened the dread. Clara, the forensics tech, hovered near the vault's entrance, her clipboard trembling in her hands. "Sheriff, we need to secure this," she said, her voice tight with fear. "If someone's still here." Laura cut her off with a sharp nod, her gaze never leaving the corridor. "They're not getting out," she said, her tone cold as steel. "Jake, with me. Clara, get your team armed and ready. Sweep the basement now." Clara nodded, scrambling back up the stairs, her footsteps echoing as she rallied the forensics crew. Jake tightened his grip on the crowbar, his pulse hammering. You sure about this? He asked, his voice low but steady. Laura's lips pressed into a thin line. No, she admitted, but we don't wait for them to come to us. She stepped forward, her flashlight beam slicing through the gloom, and Jake followed, the damp air clinging to his skin like a second shadow. The corridor stretched ahead, its rusted pipes dripping with a slow, rhythmic plink that mimicked a heartbeat. Steady, relentless, alive. The floodlight's glow faded behind them, replaced by a darkness that seemed to swallow sound itself. Laura's beam caught glints of metal and stone, the walls narrowing until they brushed her shoulders. Stay sharp, she whispered, her pistol steady. But the silence was oppressive, broken only by their breaths and the distant hum of the forensics team above. Then it came again. A thud, closer now, followed by a scrape of boots on stone. Jake's heart lurched. There! He hissed, pointing to a bend in the corridor where the shadows thickened. Laura surged forward, her flashlight locking onto a figure. A man, tall and broad, his face obscured by a hood, clutching a duffel bag that clinked with every step. Freeze! She barked, her voice a whip crack in the stillness. The man spun, his eyes glinting in the light, and bolted, his boots pounding the floor as he vanished around the bend. Damn it! Laura snapped, breaking into a run, Jake hot on her heels, the crowbar swinging at his side. The chase was a blur of shadow and steel, the corridor twisting deeper into the mill's underbelly. The man was fast, his silhouette flickering in and out of Laura's beam, but she was relentless, her breaths sharp and controlled. Jake's lungs burned, his boots slipping on the slick stone, but he pushed on, driven by the image of Tom's note. Max, find help, and the stakes it carried. The corridor opened into a cavernous chamber, its ceiling lost to darkness, its floor littered with rusted machinery and broken crates. The man darted behind a stack of barrels and Laura skidded to a halt, her pistol trained. End of the line, she shouted. Hands up, now! The man froze, his back to them, the duffel bag thudding to the ground. Slowly, he raised his hands, turning to face the light. His hood fell back, revealing a face weathered by years and hardened by secrets. Victor Hensley, a local businessman who'd once owned half the mill before it shut down. Laura's eyes widened, recognition flashing across her face. Hensley, she growled. You're behind this? Victor's lips curled into a sneer, his voice gravelly. You're too late, Sheriff. The money's gone, scattered where you'll never find it. Jake stepped forward, his crowbar glinting in the beam. Tom knew, he said, his voice raw with anger. That's why you took him, why you staged the crash. Victor's sneer faltered, his eyes darting to the bag at his feet. Tom was a fool, he spat. Thought he could play hero, expose us. He didn't know half of it. Laura's pistol didn't waver. And Max? She asked, her tone lethal. Didn't count on a dog, did you? Victor's silence was answer enough, his jaw tightening as the truth sank in. Footsteps echoed behind them. Clara and the armed forensics team, their lights flooding the chamber. Sheriff, Clara called, her voice steady now. We've got him surrounded. Laura nodded, her gaze locked on Victor. Cuff him, she ordered, and the team swarmed in, pinning his arms as he snarled, his defiance crumbling. Jake kicked the duffel bag open, revealing stacks of cash and a laptop, more evidence of the town's stolen lifeblood. It's over, he said, his voice trembling with relief and rage. Laura holstered her weapon, her face a mask of grim satisfaction. Not yet, she said, turning to the chamber's far wall, where a rusted grate led to the outside, a faint breeze stirring the fog beyond. He said the money's scattered. That means others are out there. Jake followed her gaze, the weight of her words settling in. The mill's shadows retreated under the floodlights, but the storm wasn't done. Its heart still beat beyond these walls. Victor's laugh rasped through the chamber, bitter and broken. You'll never stop it, he said as the cuffs clicked shut. Willow Creek's ours, always has been. Laura ignored him, her mind already racing ahead, but Jake felt the chill of his words, a promise of battles yet to come. The fog swirled outside, the pines whispering secrets, and Max's absence loomed large, a hero whose instincts had sparked a reckoning. The fog began to lift as dawn crept over Willow Creek, its pale light filtering through the pines and scattering the shadows that had clung to the old mill. Sheriff Laura Bennett stood outside the rusted grate, her sharp green eyes tracing the horizon where Victor Hensley's words still echoed. Willow Creek's ours. Always has been. The forensics team swarmed the basement behind her, their floodlights buzzing as they cataloged the vault's grim bounty. Crates of cash, ledgers of betrayal, and blueprints of a town marked for ruin. Jake Miller leaned against the mill's wall, his crowbar resting at his feet, his chest heaving with the weight of a night that had stretched beyond breaking. Victor sat cuffed in a squad car, his sneer silenced by the dawn, but the storm he'd unleashed lingered in the air, a promise of more to come. Laura turned to Jake, her face etched with exhaustion but lit with resolve. "We got him," she said, her voice steady despite the strain. "But he's right about one thing. There's more out there. This wasn't a one-man job." She held up the laptop from Victor's duffel bag, its screen glowing faintly with encrypted files. "These names in the ledgers, church elders, business owners, some of them might still be in on it. We've only scratched the surface." Jake nodded, his gaze drifting to the fog-draped pines. "Tom knew," he said, his voice raw. "He tried to stop it, and nearly paid with his life." The mill's rusted frame groaned one last time, a final sigh as the forensics team hauled out evidence bags, their chatter a distant hum. Clara emerged from the basement, her glasses fogged with sweat, clutching a file stamped with the town's seal. "Sheriff," she said, her tone urgent but triumphant. "We found payment records, transfers to offshore accounts, signed by Victor and 3 others. One's a councilman. We've got enough to start unraveling the whole network." Laura's lips twitched into a grim smile. "Good," she said. "Let's take it all down." The squad cars rolled out, Victor's defiant silhouette shrinking in the rear view as the town awoke to a new day. Jake followed Laura back to her patrol car, the damp earth squelching under his boots, and paused at the sight of Willow Creek stirring beyond the fog. Rooftops glinting in the rising sun, smoke curling from chimneys, a quiet resilience unbroken by the night's revelations. "They'll fight back," he said, more to himself than her. Laura glanced at him, her hand resting on the car door. "Maybe," she said, "but so will we, and we've got Max on our side." The hospital was a short drive, its sterile halls a stark contrast to the mill's decay. Tom Grayson lay in a bed by the window, his bruises fading under the soft light, his breath even as he slept. Max curled beside him, his golden fur clean now, his head resting on Tom's chest, a guardian finally at peace. Jake stepped into the room, Laura behind him, and the sight hit him like a wave. Tom's hand tangled in Max's fur, the dog's eyes half open, watching them with a quiet trust that needed no words. "He's stable," the nurse whispered, adjusting Tom's IV. "Should be awake soon." Laura nodded, setting the laptop on a table nearby. "When he is, we'll need his statement. Everything he knows about Victor and the others." Jake sank into a chair, his crowbar replaced by a cup of hospital coffee, and watched Max's tail thump once. A faint rhythm of victory. "He saved more than Tom," Jake said, his voice thick. "He saved the whole damn town." Tom stirred, his eyes fluttering open, and the first thing he saw was Max. A weak smile broke across his face, his hand tightening in the dog's fur. "Hey, boy," he rasped, his voice hoarse but warm. Max licked his cheek, a soft whine escaping, and Tom's gaze shifted to Jake and Laura. "You found it," he said, not a question but a statement. Laura nodded, her tone gentle. "The vault, the money, Victor, we've got him. But we need you to fill in the blanks." Tom exhaled, a shudder of relief and regret. "I found their books a year ago," he said, his words slow but clear. "They'd been bleeding the town dry. Church funds, savings, everything. I was fixing Victor's car when I saw the ledgers in his trunk. Tried to gather proof, but they caught me. The crash. It was their warning." His eyes met Max's, glistening with tears. He wouldn't let them win. The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over them, and Laura rested a hand on his shoulder. "You're a hero, Tom," she said, her voice soft but firm. "And so's Max." Jake leaned forward, his coffee forgotten. We'll finish this, he promised. For you and for him. Days later, Willow Creek gathered at the town square, the fog a distant memory under a sky streaked with gold. Tom walked out of the hospital, leaning on a cane, Max trotting beside him, his tail wagging like a banner of hope. The crowd cheered. Mrs. Hargrove with her thermos, Mr. Carter with his cane, kids waving homemade signs, hailing a man and his dog who'd turned tragedy into triumph. Laura stood at the edge, her badge glinting, her eyes on the horizon where the fight continued. But for now, this was enough. Days later, Willow Creek gathered at the town square, the fog a distant memory under a sky streaked with gold. Tom walked out of the hospital, leaning on a cane, Max trotting beside him, his tail wagging like a banner of hope. The crowd cheered. Mrs. Hargrove with her thermos, Mr. Carter with his cane, kids waving homemade signs, hailing a man and his dog who'd turned tragedy into triumph. Laura stood at the edge, her badge glinting, her eyes on the horizon where the fight continued. But for now, this was enough. The sun climbed higher, bathing the town in light, and Max barked once, a clear, joyful sound that echoed through the streets. In Willow Creek, they'd tell this story for years. The misty morning, a dog's love defied the dark, sparking a dawn worth fighting for. What do you think? Could your pet be as brave as Max? Could you stand up like Tom? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of resilience and heart. Until next time, keep believing in the bonds that hold us together.